Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Welcome, everyone, to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get just what you need to move yourself forward. As you know, my name is Mary Baker, and I'm here to give you the education, the tools, and the motivation to look at exactly what's in your way today and what you can do about it. So this week in Session 2, we're going to dive a little deeper into what is self-confidence really? What is real self-esteem and what it isn't? Because I feel that self-esteem or self-confidence is at the core of empowerment. But it's also something I think in our culture, especially, is so misunderstood, mislabeled, and misapplied. So in this session, we're going to talk about what is a true definition of self-confidence, what creates great confidence, what can hurt it and or destroy it, and if yours isn't as fabulous as you would like it to be, what you can do going forward to heal it. So before we go any further, a few things I want to mention, and that is, if you're just joining us for this episode, it might be really helpful if you go back and listen to the first episode, which explains what the show is about and what we're going to be looking at here during these sessions. The other thing is I just want to thank everyone for their wonderful feedback on how helpful the first episode was to really motivate them to looking inward and making some great changes in their life. So I just want to thank everyone out there. Thanks to the tribe, and welcome to all the new people to the tribe. Okay, so first, let's get into the what, shall we? So today I want to dig down deep about the idea or the concept of self-esteem. I think it's something that's so misunderstood. I think in our culture we think of someone who has great self-esteem as someone who doesn't sweat it, always seems very happy and strong and confident on the outside, someone who has great success in terms of how we view success, maybe financial success, academic achievement, awards, notoriety, people who have become a household name, that we assume that they're really confident people. Of course, nowadays, I think most of us are a little bit more savvy to the reality that a lot of those folks actually are really hurting on the inside. If you look at people that we've lost over the past recent years, performers and comedians as such, to suicide and drug addiction and depression. So I think it'd be helpful to start out defining what self-esteem is not. So although folks with great self-confidence often achieve wonderful things, they're inventors, they're athletes, they're performers, they're leaders. And so on the outside, we often measure folks with really great self-esteem by what they're able to accomplish. We often measure their looks, their financial success, their status, their notoriety. But the danger in this is we're looking at what can possibly become conditional self-worth. So in other words, if someone isn't beautiful, isn't very smart, very capable, very talented, hasn't accomplished great things, does that mean they don't have great self-esteem? And then what would happen if, God forbid, they would lose all that to an accident or something happening? Are they any less worthy of a person? So as you can see, self-esteem and true self-confidence is really about self-worth. How we see ourselves, how we value ourselves, or how we devalue ourselves. So let's look at a few more things that self-esteem is not. It's not incongruent either. You can be very successful at the office, yet have horrible self-care, have poor relationships because you have no time for them, etc., etc. Maybe your health is faltering as well. This is incongruence. This is pouring yourself into one thing above all else to have some worth. Again, we're back to that conditional self-worth. Great self-esteem is never at the expense of others. It's not a one-up, one-down relationship. In fact, it's folks who struggle with self-esteem who want to be on top and tend to tear others down so that they can feel better. Whereas people who are empowered like to build others up organically. Self-esteem is not always about being the strong one. Even though resilience is important, it's not about toughing it out and avoiding your vulnerability. Self-esteem is not fear-based either. And what I mean by fear-based is that we're not as focused outside of ourselves on outcomes, on people, places, and things, on people's reactions, of events going perfectly the way we plan them. Because that's really dangerous when we outsource our self-esteem. And the underlying fear is, if all those things outside of me don't go perfectly, then I'm not okay as a person. And you can see how the math is flawed there. So I just wanted to point out, probably creating some controversy doing so, how great self-esteem is so misunderstood. And I think it's really worth our time digging into what it really is, what it isn't, and where it comes from. So how do you know that you struggle with self-esteem? And I first want to say it's going to probably take you a while to sort through all the variables to really get a good handle around where you are on the continuum of self-esteem, because it is a continuum. And more than likely, there are some areas where you're going to struggle and other areas where you're doing great. So let's look at some of the symptoms of low self-esteem. And again, each of these areas we could dive in and do a whole session on each one, but we won't. The first one is blurred boundaries. Now again, boundaries is another concept that we could spend all day talking about and never finish. But not realizing where you end and others begin. Having difficulty not taking responsibility for other people's feelings, reactions, behaviors, and what they think about you. Also, taking more responsibility for what's going on in someone else's life while ignoring your own. Blur boundaries in terms of not being able to hear no from events on the outside of you, from other people saying no to you, as well as saying no to others and to things that aren't good for you, things that you no longer need in your life, that don't feel right for you, so on and so forth. The other part of boundary work, which we will get into in a future episode, is internal boundaries or self-discipline, right? So that self-discipline piece is a big one that people usually have to work on if they're working on self-esteem. So blurred boundaries. The next one is emotional maturity. Now that's a really strong term that some people wince when they hear it. But emotional maturity means being emotionally honest, staying on your side of the street, using an I statement, owning your feelings, not acting out, not being defensive. You get the picture. It's really owning the real self. Another one is disowning your needs, your desires, your beliefs. You outsource them. You're focused outside of yourself and what other people say and what other people say you should think and do and be and believe, as opposed to what you really feel and think about deep inside. Symptoms of low self-esteem are all the fabulous codependent control behaviors, which, again, is a big concept, and one that if that's been pointed out to you, if you thought you struggled with that, it's a wonderful thing to look into and start to heal. In a nutshell, it means being focused on outcomes outside of yourself, focusing on nouns, people, places, and things, focusing on what other people think of you as opposed to what you think of yourself, how other people are going to feel if you set a boundary or take a risk or make a change. Hand in hand with that is the fear of things not being perfect. So a lot of perfectionism, again, tying our self-worth to what happens. Tying our self-worth to everything going just right. Tying our self-worth to making things happen on the outside of us, which we have no control over. So another, of course, that brings up anxiety and depression, because oftentimes people with self-esteem issues struggle with general anxiety, where they function, but they're never able to relax, or panic attacks. A lot of these folks have functional depression where, you get out of bed and you go to work every day and you have relationships and you take care of the kids and what have you, but you're not feeling really fabulous. You're doing just enough to function. And then you might have bouts where, there are some days where you can't get out of bed or don't want to. So let's talk about an example of someone who struggles with self-esteem. So let's take Jamie, for example. Jamie is someone I worked with years ago. Wonderful, wonderful person. Kind-hearted, sweet, talented, smart, creative. Had some great ideas of where she wanted to be in her life. Unfortunately, Jamie, she was honest, but she tended to procrastinate. She'd start things and say, I got to do that, and wouldn't follow through or got distracted and would drop the ball. Jamie was also very self-critical, especially when she dropped the ball. She would shame herself and beat herself up for that. And then she would lose motivation to even do anything more. She started her new college degree, but then life got in the way, right? Too many things to do, not enough time, everyone asking her to do things for them. She was so busy taking care of other people that she dropped out. Unfortunately, Jamie's story is one that I hear often. And over the years, I wanted to understand what made people self-sabotage like this. What made them find valuable excuses not to follow through. Why were they letting themselves down? It just didn't make any sense. So in order to understand what the causal factors are for low self-esteem, we have to go way back and find out where the damage truly began. It actually begins very early in childhood, where over the years the child is not allowed to fully develop emotionally, psychologically, and sometimes physically. Because a child, in order to be able to kick back and be silly and be innocent and explore and have fun and take risks and find out all of what they're capable of, they need to have two solid parents, or at least two solid caregivers who are grounded and mature and capable, so the child can just be a child. Susan Forward, in her old book on toxic parents, talks about the origins of this and the effects, and it's a great resource to check out when you have time. The other big issue of where self-esteem gets messed up in childhood has to do with boundaries, and what I call blurred boundaries. So in essence, where you begin and others end. So your thoughts, feelings, choices, behaviors are valuable and individual to you, and they're separate from other people's thoughts, choices, feelings, and behaviors. And so when parents can, at the dinner table, just honor that's what you were feeling, that's what you were thinking, that's what you believed, as crazy as it may have been. They didn't shame you, talk you out of it, make you think there was something wrong with your belief or your feeling or your need, and they certainly didn't make it about them. Now, there are very easy, subtle ways that this can happen. You can get a question. Are you sure? That's not true. Why would you think that? Oh, it'll be okay. All these invalidating statements. That's all it takes. So then you start to slowly doubt, little by little, day by day, like we talked about before, about what you truly believe, what you truly need, what you think about yourself, what your yes is, what your no is. Other more crucial boundary violations are verbal, physical, sexual, and mental abuse, because they violate your boundaries on several levels, leaving you as a victim with the message that you do not matter, your no certainly doesn't matter, that you shouldn't trust your no, and you can't trust others to hear nor respect your no, that you don't deserve to make choices, that you don't deserve to be honored and respected. Now, these are some very serious issues that I always encourage people, get some good counseling around that. Someone where you can go sit with week after week and little by little unpack all of that and heal it. Because you don't go through something like that and come out unscathed. It just isn't possible. So if you look back on your childhood, maybe you can find some subtle areas where you had environments that created self-doubt for you. And it doesn't always have to be our parents. It could be siblings, especially older siblings that we look up to and model after. Could be neighbors, cousins, friends, could be your first grade teacher. Usually people have a sense of a couple of bad memories that they have that also became defining moments where they started doubting themselves. And they stopped setting boundaries and they stopped saying no because they didn't want to be emotionally abandoned. So right now, I just want you to take a moment and think back. And think back to, were your boundaries honored or not? Were your thoughts and feelings and beliefs and choices allowed to be yours and to not be judged? That you could trust yourself and trust your thinking and trust your feelings, and trust your dreams and what you desired. So what happens if you look back and you can start to see, wow, this is where my boundaries were violated. This is where I struggled. Now it makes sense. The next question is, of course, how do I heal this? Now, I'm going to broadly speak to how we do this. And of course, I'm sure you already realize this is some in-depth work. And this is work that you probably want to work with someone around, so you're not doing it by yourself. So basically, you want to start having more compassion for yourself, real empathy, real self-acceptance. You're creating that contrast and saying, wait a minute, was that healthy or unhealthy, the way I was treated or what I experienced? Why or why not? And naturally, some anger can come up from this, and that's how you know you're ready to do some real grief work around it. It's really just grieving all the unmet needs, all the ways you were hurt, all the ways you were dishonored, and connecting the dots to how that has impacted your life all the way up until today. All the choices you made, all the ways you may have sabotaged yourself, all the ways you are not living your full potential. If it's hard to have compassion for yourself, what's encouraged is you think about a child that you love dearly. Or if you don't have a niece or nephew or a child of your own, maybe the neighbor's child, maybe someone else's child that you see as pure and innocent and lovable. Try to think of them. Would they deserve all that? Would it be fair? Is there anything that child did or didn't do to deserve not getting what they needed? So some of the things that you should have received, right, was number one, to feel safe, secure, and loved, to feel cherished and protected, that you were not put in dangerous situations, that there was always a grown-up who was present and able to protect you from bad things. The second thing is to belong to something wonderful, which gave you a strong identity. Something you were proud of belonging to. You knew what your family values were. They were spoken and they were expressed, and there was evidence in how people behaved. An example of that is, we have good boundaries in this family, so I don't let your sister rummage through everything in your bedroom and take your stuff, because that's disrespectful. The third thing that's so important is to be allowed to be an individual, like really. To be allowed to have your feelings. And your family didn't have to agree with them, they just had to accept that that's how you felt, and there was nothing wrong with that. One better, maybe someone empathized and said, "Sweetie, I'm so sorry. I know you're angry. That wasn't fair." To be allowed to think differently from other members of the family, to have your own thoughts and opinions, to have your disdain for things that are not going well, to have your no when things are not okay. To be able to make your own mistakes and fall on your face and get back up. And that no one rescued you or talked you out of taking care of yourself. You had your consequences and you had your benefits, and you chose from there, and you learned and you grew. The fourth thing, which is so important, is to never have to be perfect, invisible, or parentified. And what I mean by that is, it wasn't perfect and it wasn't horrible. Good enough was good enough. Doing your best was enough. You weren't invisible. Your voice was heard. It was acknowledged. You were seen and known. And you did not have to grow up too fast and be parentified, is the term. You could just be 8 years old and do what other 8-year-olds did. You could be 12 years old and not have to cook dinner because no one's sober enough to get off the couch to do so. Number 5, to be able to trust and count on parents to be grown-ups. And what I mean by this is, yes, they pay the bills, but they're also emotionally grown up. And they don't react and they don't shut down. They face challenges head on, and they allow you to be the one to fall apart because you're a 7-year-old little kid who just fell down. 6, to be able to be yourself, to get good mirroring. And what I mean by good mirroring is people say, "Wow, so that's what you're thinking. Okay, yeah, that makes sense." Or "Good for you," being proud of yourself. Or "I can imagine how scared you are." Or "Look what you just accomplished." 7, to be allowed to grieve and have that validated. And to just sit with your feelings and for them to just let you do that. That they didn't try to fix your feelings. Like, "Honey, it'll be okay. Stop crying. Here's some tissues. It's okay. Let's go get some ice cream." And finally, to be able to figure things out on your own with guidance and support, but not control. So that it wasn't about them. You could figure out, if it took you 22 times to build that tower out of blocks when you were little, that you were allowed to do that. And they kept falling down, and the parent just let you do that. The next one is to be allowed to figure things out on your own. To come to the answers when you're doing your homework by yourself. For no one to jump in and do it for you, giving you the impression that, I don't think you can handle that. By figuring it out by yourself, doing it the hard way, beating your head against the wall, but then you finally find the solution, is so empowering. And you learned so much along the way. Then you believed in yourself more. You're starting to see the connections here, right? Finally, and probably most importantly, you were allowed to trust your gut. You know, these days, we're not telling kids stranger danger, right? We're telling them no matter who it is, if your gut is twisting and it doesn't feel right, go with that. It's okay. Because we know now that oftentimes a child is hurt by people they already know and are supposed to trust. So being able to trust your gut and not be talked out of that and not be told that you're crazy and that's nuts and that's not logical. So these are some things, as you can see, are boundary issues, right? That without boundaries, we can't have a whole sense of self. Now, we'll get into boundaries later down the road, but I just wanted to give you a sense of how you can start healing. So if you went through this list and said, "Oh, wow, those things were not given to me. They were not allowed for me. I want you to start practicing as you go through your week. How can you give those things to yourself today? Because just because they doesn't mean you, right? Just because they didn't give you what you needed doesn't mean you cannot give that to yourself today. You can trust your feelings and your thoughts and your perceptions today. You can hold on to them today. You can stay away from people who try to talk you out of them today. When tomorrow you get up, you can start paying more attention to what your gut is saying. You can ask for what you need and see what happens. You can take care of yourself in your relationships. You can grieve what you were never given. That in of itself is so self-honoring because you're finally making things right for yourself, even if they couldn't do that for you. This moves into the next area about our insides matching our outsides, right? About being genuine, about being congruent, and what Brene Brown talks about resilience. So being authentic, right? What you're really thinking and feeling on the inside is what you're showing on the outside, appropriately, of course. That there isn't this disconnect, that you're not smiling and saying, sure, that sounds fabulous, and on the inside you're like, oh, hell no. I don't want that. That's not what I asked for. That's not what I want to do. It means saying what you really feel, even when others are uncomfortable. Now, of course, doing this in a healthy way with an I statement. I'm not saying go around and lash out at people. Just say, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me. Or this is what I really need. Or I'm really tired, I need to go home. Or I need you to listen to me. Or that's not working for me. I need to leave this relationship. So in other words, it means being really emotionally honest. To be vulnerable, to be real. No couching, just your God's honest truth. So in other words, your yes is an authentic yes, and your no is a no. And it's going to be the same story next Tuesday, so therefore you're going to be able to follow through on your yes or your no because they're true for you. And if you're not sure, you give yourself time to think about it before you tell them. It means stating very clearly and very specifically what you need. And then letting go if the other person says, no, I'm sorry, I can't meet that for you. Then you'll keep it moving. It means taking risks with letting go of what other people want you to be. That's about them. And whatever they think and feel and need is valid for them. But just because they can't handle who you really want to be doesn't mean that you should not follow through on that. There's more detachment here, as you can see, more letting go of the outcome. One of the great tests as you go through your day to see how well you do this is they say pay attention to the first nanosecond, the first thing that comes up when someone says something to you or asks you a question. So if they say, hey, can you help me move on Saturday? And your immediate reaction is like, oh God, no. I really already had my weekend planned. But if you say, yeah, sure, what time do you need me there? You just went against yourself because you were afraid. You didn't want to look like a jerk. You didn't want to let them down, all that stuff. But when you said yes, when you were screaming no on the inside, that's disowning the self. And re-owning the self is what we're going to be talking about here. So don't be hard on yourself if you did that. Just create awareness around it. You're just going to do some gentle, compassionate awareness. Sometimes you'll walk back to that person and say, I'm so sorry. I know I said yes, but I really can't help you do that. Sometimes you'll just suck it up and follow through because your integrity says, I want my yes to mean yes, so I guess I have to learn my lesson and go help them move on Saturday. But next time I'll be more honest. So in essence, owning it, right? Owning what you think, what you feel, and what you need, and what your real agenda is. Yes, folks, this means your real agenda. Perhaps underneath it, some of it's fear-based. Maybe you want other people to really like you. You don't want them to get pissed off. You don't want them to think you're selfish or uncaring or all about you. You also feel more comfortable for other people to be placated and be okay so you can feel safe. Now, where does that come from? Growing up where other people were reactionary when you were a kid, and you learned you were responsible for other people's feelings, which is so not true. Maybe you're afraid to put your stuff on them because that would really make you vulnerable, and maybe you don't have good templates in the past of that going okay. Like when you were little and you were vulnerable and you were scared and one of your caregivers had a fit. No, you have to learn how to do this. You can't be scared. You got to pull it up by the bootstraps. Keep it moving. Don't be afraid. Maybe deep down you really want other people to rescue you. This is a hard one to admit. But that way you don't have to be wrong. That way you don't have to fall on your face, because maybe you don't believe in yourself enough yet. And then finally, maybe underneath, giving your power away so you don't screw it up. You're so afraid of being blamed. So how do we do that? We say statements such as, well, I can't do that because they. I can't do that because other people will be upset. They'll have a fit. They'll guilt me. They'll punish me. They'll leave. So ownership means detaching from whatever is going on for someone else. That's about them. That's their business and not yours. So ownership also means owning everything that you choose. Choices means boundaries. Choices means you choose that, and it's not about anybody else. When we make a choice, though, we risk being wrong. We risk falling on our face. We risk failure. And ultimately, all that means is we risk loss. And if we're not willing to risk, we're deep down afraid we can't handle the outcome. Owning what you choose means you're showing the world who you are in a very vulnerable way. And that's difficult. It means really looking at the consequences of all of your choices. Again, stand in the middle of the room, put your left hand out and say, here are the benefits of this choice. Put your right hand out and say, okay, but at what cost? And there could be some very real costs to things. But owning both of them and still deciding from there because something is more important than the consequences means you're in reality. And that's where you want to be, because unless you're grounded in reality, you can't be confident. How you behave as well. Maturational age is what I'm speaking to here. Are you reactive to things around you and things people do and say and situations, and when things don't go your way is a really good test? Or are you more responsive? Is it thoughtful? Is there a focus on yourself? Or is there immediate reaction, oh my God, I can't believe they? Or why won't he? All the victim statements, right? Ownership means, wow, I need to accept that just didn't go well. I wonder if there's anything I can do differently. Or maybe I just have to accept that that's the reality. Another big way to take ownership is to stop and listen to your intuition. Now, we always know in hindsight, looking back, when we don't listen to it, and then we have all of the obvious evidence why we should have. We don't often have it going in, though. Sometimes it's very vague, and that's okay. You're not always going to be given the answers. But this can be your internal guidance to trust your gut. There shouldn't be anxiety when we trust our gut. There's just a peaceful knowing, a peaceful urging to look at something, check something out, or say no to something. Practice doing that in little ways throughout your day and see how it goes. See what opens up for you. See how much more grounded you feel. So looking at that, looking at taking ownership of yourself, taking ownership of everything you think, everything you feel, everything you need, and how you behave, I promise you, will raise your self-esteem and help you start to feel more confident. Because it never was, never will be about anyone else. It ain't about them. It's all about you at the end of the day, every day. And if you start taking care of this, other things in your life will start falling into place. So go over to the show notes at ownitpowercast.com/episode 2 for the links to some great resources and to sign up to get the worksheets each week before each podcast so you can follow along and dig deeper into the work, because the deeper you dig, the more you're going to get out of it. And hey, if you found this helpful, please put out a positive review. Go ahead and hit subscribe, spread the word, because you will be helping others find this podcast and get the help they need. And every time you pass it on, you are professing ownership of yourself. So pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and remember, own it now so you can really own it later. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next week.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now so you can really own it later.